Hello from Texas. This is how to brainstorm a story on diaspora, second generation, homeland, and why I write. The overall conflict both of my parents come from a small village in El Salvador, and I also was born and raised in the US, the country responsible for our war, for so much death, corruption, and poverty through a 20-year war. Initially, I thought this would be the message, but it is the story's conflict. My dad takes me to El Salvador undocumented when I am 1.5 years old, inspired by a radio person who said, "Don't forget about your abuelos." My mother refuses to go, terrified of not being able to return. This is an aside. When she left, due to trauma, she said she would never return to El Salvador. I will include this in the story, but it won't be a main focus. I believe going at such an early age sets a foundation for my biological plus physical connection to El Salvador, homeland. In my mind, as a child, there is a parallel connection between our lives in the US and our lives in El Salvador. Although El Salvador was a temporary to a child, this is forever. The privilege of living in the US is complicated by empire, colonization, and war. I'll have to include this in the story if it's going to be authentic. I exist in a love-hate relationship with a life I love. The question can also be, why do I idealize El Salvador with its history of colonization and violence too? All I can do is write via the diaspora plus citizen lens. Homeland, 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 indigenous. Through research, writing, and interviews, I'm trying to uncover that which is spiritual and rooted in volcanoes and cannot exist anywhere else but in El Salvador or our bloodline. So what you've seen me do is sort of map out all the different things that I think this story should include. Obviously, I've spent time thinking about this, but as you do this, you want to make sure that you're sort of thinking about the different components and what are going to be the important things. As you can see, the center box that had diaspora, second generation, and why I write was connected to both the privilege of being born and raised in a country like the United States, but also looking at this like inherent need that my father had to take me back to El Salvador when I'm 1.5 years old. And that again comes back to what I said was going to be the story's conflict at the beginning. So this is just sort of to help walk you through thinking about how do you think of all the moving pieces in the story. I think that this story would begin with probably my father listening to the radio. And hearing the announcer and then coming home, imagining that then he decides to come home, right, to my mom and have this conversation about going to El Salvador. When I talked to my dad about this actually happening, he said that within like 2 weeks he had flights. So it was such a sort of, he felt so motivated and moved to do this, to go see my great-grandmother, his grandmother who had raised him, that it was a very quick and easy decision for him. So that is obviously something I'll work into the story as well. I hope that this helps you sort of figure out like what are all the moving parts, how to use the brainstorming sheet, and then also thinking about the asides. What are small details that you'll include, but you will not spend a lot of time on because you have to move your story fairly quickly. Okay, well, I'm in Texas. Have a good weekend.